Okay, so let's
Okay.
get started. And I'll sit here and unscrew my keyboard so people can see what the insides look.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. Cool, cool. So I've got this. As you can see, I'll show some in the video too, so folks online can see. But the Atrius is my project. It's a ergonomic mechanical travel keyboard kit. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but it's let me pull it up here. I've got a few on hand with me. This is the original prototype um, in acrylic that I built for myself, and still use it practically every day. But as you can see, it's got this nice small feel to it. It's what's typically called a 40% kit, meaning it's got about 40% as many keys as you would normally see on a keyboard. Um, So that's got some pros and cons. It fits nicely in your pocket or in your bag if you've got a big pocket. But with a small number of keys, you do kind of have to use a lot of layering, uh, like with the FN key, which you see typically on laptops. Um, Similar approaches used here to get to all the keys you'd normally have. Um, and something that's a little different about this is that it's an open source project. Um, so I originally built it just for my own personal use. I I work remotely, so it's really important for me to have something I can take with me when I go out and about, coffee shops or working from a park or whatever. And I got a nice mechanical keyboard, but it was kind of too big and bulky. So I figured, something like this I could just take with me a lot more easily. And originally I thought it would be something just for my own personal use. And then, as I started to show it to folks, I would get a lot of people interested in, wondering if they could get one for themselves. So um, started out, I just, put the files on GitHub or whatever, and then uh, then started getting into sourcing it and sourcing kits and building them for folks as well, because with you can get there's a lot of advantages to buying in bulk. Not everyone has access to all the parts, so yeah. So that's how I got to where I am now. Started just selling these online. The kit, it's got a bunch of different parts to it. You start off with a case. So this is an unfinished case with made out of wood. The the original prototype was done in acrylic, but I really like the look of the wood. It's pretty sharp. It's got that nice grain to it, and you don't see a lot of that with computer peripherals. So it's kind of unique. It's got your 4 layers there. I don't know if you can see that, but this is all laser cut on birch. Um, so it gives it a really sharp, precise edge to it. So that that is the case is designed with a CAD program that is kind of we call it like a programmatic design. So basically, the the design is a program, and you run the program, and it emits the files that describe this shape, and then you hand that off to a laser cutter. So you can tweak the angle or other parameters to get a different case if you want something, something a little different. Um, Hey Alex, do you think you could turn the camera just so I could see folks? That'd be cool. Not feel a little less like I'm talking to nothing. Great. Um, Yeah, and also, of course, yeah, if you have any questions, please do let me know. Maybe Alex could repeat them as we go along. So yeah, you start with a case done in wood or acrylic. That's still an option, although most people seem to like to prefer the wood. And then for a mechanical keyboard, it's a little different from what you typically see with a keyboard. With most keyboards are made with like a layer of rubber underneath all the keys, and when you press down, the rubber is just providing resistance against your fingers. So a mechanical keyboard is different in that each switch has a physical spring behind it, and and commonly has some tactile feedback. So this is a key switch from that I use for the Atrius. It's called a cherry blue switch. So it's got a nice little click to it. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's kind of gives you a really crisp feel to every keystroke that I really like. Yeah, and then the switches are all seated in the circuit board, which is like the kind of the at the core of the design. So this is something I designed myself in a program called KiCad. You can see it's got each of these are positions where each of the holes are where the switches would go inside the case, and as you build the kit, you end up just soldering them on in there along with the diodes. But yeah, the circuit board is also designed by use of a program. The position of the switch footprints there is all calculated based on offsets, and then there's a program that does the trig to calculate the positioning based on the angle of the split there. So that's just a nice way to lay that on out and get the circuit board design in there. So you can see there you've got kind of a grid, columns and rows, and the traces all bring it back to the center into the microcontroller. So yeah, you can think of the microcontroller as the brain of the keyboard. That the microcontroller is kind of what makes the keyboard act like a keyboard. So it communicates to the computer that you're plugged into and kind of translates the electrical signals from the key switches into something the computer can make use of. So with this microcontroller is called an A-Star Micro. It's a really tiny board there. I mean, just the size of your thumb or smaller. And the chip in there is called an Atmega Atmega 32U4. That family or that architecture is kind of popularized by the Arduino platform. So I don't know how many of you have seen the Arduino Uno. This is kind of the classic Arduino board that that has popularized certain types of hobbyist electronics. So this is kind of the one you would see most commonly, but it's a little bit different from the one I've got in mind because I need something that speaks USB natively for a USB keyboard. That makes a lot of sense, but it's a compatible architecture. You can use the Arduino tools to program the A-Star Micro, but yeah, the A-Star Micro is a little more advanced with that USB USB capability there. So, yeah, any questions so far before I go on? I think you may have muted you on the other side there. Hey, there we go.
The question. Can you hear us?
Yeah, you're coming through.
Okay, how many prototypes did you go through to with every part of that? It seems like a lot of work and a lot of trial and error.
How many prototypes? Yeah, so the original prototype actually worked, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting to have to iterate through it a few times. There were a few problems with the case. In particular, the two center keys there were too close together, and I actually kind of sanded down the edges of them so they wouldn't rub against each other. So that was a big problem, and yeah, I think there was like one other place where the keys were just too close together. But apart from that, that was really the only problem with the first version. I read up a lot about the design of keyboards, and I also built a keyboard from a kit before I did my own, which is the Ergodox kit, which is quite a bit bigger. It's like a two-part keyboard, but it's also mechanical and uses the layering approach. So I learned a lot from that. But the other thing about the prototype, the original prototype, is that it doesn't actually have a circuit board in it. I don't know if you can see that because of the translucent plastic there, but that is a hand-wired matrix. So there's no circuit board. It's every single switch is connected to the ones above it and to the left and right, just using like regular hookup wire. So if you're doing a single, like a one-off design, getting a circuit board is really impractical. It's quite expensive. You don't start to really see reasonable pricing until you get to at least 10, a run of at least 10. So yeah, the prototype, I had a lot more flexibility. I could just do the hand wiring, but it takes much longer. It was about 4 hours to run all those wires, whereas now it's about 40 minutes to solder a board with a circuit board. So the circuit board, I also had the original prototype. There were a couple problems with it, so yeah, this is kind of like the second revision of the circuit board. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, from what I remember, when I built that one, was there's a little notch that needed to be taken out for the USB cord to be plugged into the controller, right?
Right, yeah. So yours was from the V1 of the circuit board, and I literally just had to take a hacksaw at it to make clearance for the USB connector. So not a big deal, for the first 10 that I did for the prototype run, but was able to get that corrected as well. But yeah, I got a lot of help from folks online. There's a site called geekhack.org. They've got forums. That's where the kit that I built first was kind of started, and I was able to post my designs and get some feedback on that to gain from some of the wisdom of the folks who had done this before. So yeah. And then this one is kind of my second prototype. It looks a little funny because it's got the keycaps on here are actually taken from a mid-90s Apple keyboard. This uses a different switch type that is much harder to find keycaps for. So I wanted to experiment with it, but I had to find a donor board, as they call it, to get going on that. So this one, it's much quieter, so it's nice to have, the option to have something, that makes a real racket, or which I prefer if I can afford to make the noise, or something I can use when people around me need some peace and quiet. So with the kits that I'm selling, there's an option for the quieter ones or the clicky ones, but the ones I sell don't require you to pull the keycaps off an existing board. So, yeah. And, any other questions before I go on?
Go ahead.
Great. Sorry, it's Nick. I had a couple of questions. One was just the keycaps for the quiet and the noisy switches. Do they interchange, or are they actually different caps?
Right. Okay. So that's a little confusing. Yeah, because these are the keycaps for the Cherry switches, and Cherry makes quiet switches and clicky switches, and those are the ones that I sell with the kits. But these are Matthias switches, which are they also have quiet and clicky, but the parts are just harder to find. So you can't really. It's harder to do that in volume. The rest of the designs should be compatible. Like the circuit board works with both types, but the keycaps are the main thing that kind of make me stick with the Cherry switches for the time being. So yeah.
Thank you.
If I can ask one more question. To make this a product that you can sell, how many of these kits did you have to order? I mean, I expect you have to buy all the keys and the boards and the laser cut so how many do you have to order to make this something that becomes viable to be able to sell?
Sure. Yeah. Good question. When I was starting off, I made some for friends and I sold them to friends, and I was doing one at a time at that point, and it was but at that time I didn't have the circuit board, so I was actually pretty lucky because I was up in Seattle at the time, and in Seattle there's a there's a hackerspace that will let you come in, and they will let you email an order for their laser cutter, and you just drop by and they'll cut it for you practically on the spot. So that was very easy to do on a low volume basis. Most hacker spaces I've found since then are a lot more particular, and they will make you buy a membership before you can do that, which can really add up. And so yeah, but the keycaps do benefit a fair bit from buying in bulk as well. But so yeah, I've been able to offer better prices since starting to ramp up the volume on that. But yeah, when I was building them one at a time, it was very slow because I was doing all the hand wiring, and I could really only do one a week. And once I got enough orders, I started to think about the circuit board and to think how much time that would save me. And now when I think about going back to soldering each of those wires individually, it makes me cringe. Yeah, does that answer your question? Cool. Yeah. If there aren't any other questions, I can go on. There's a. I was going to show just a basic, simple keyboard firmware that I could run if we've got time for that.
Yeah, there's some time to do that. So let's do a little quick demo.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, the full keyboard firmware that I typically use is it's a small C code base. It's about between 100 and 200 lines of C, but you know, it's fairly full featured. That's what I use every day, but I'd just like to demonstrate kind of the simplicity of like how to do the simplest thing possible with a microcontroller that acts as a USB device. So here I've got one of the A-Star micros inside a breadboard wired into a single switch. So this is a switch. This is the type I was using in my prototype. It's a little bit different, but you know, it's wired into some of the pins from the microcontroller. So if you're familiar with breadboards, the way they're used in prototyping, the rows across this way are all connected. So yeah, this one is wired into. All the pins are numbered. This is let's get rid of those. The switch itself is wired into the ground and pin 11 here. So I'm going to just screencast here to show what I've got using just a really simplified firmware here. Whoa. Okay, cool. This is the Arduino IDE. So this is not what I use for like the development of the main keyboard firmware, like the production one. But this is like a great way to get started with with electronics and the Arduino platform. So just to emphasize the simplicity of doing things with USB, this is what I'd like to show today. So with the Arduino platform, you've got two functions you have to define. You start off with setup that runs once at the beginning of when the board is booted. And I'm going to bump up the font size here. Oh, are you kidding me? This requires restarting to change the font size. Oh, no, it doesn't. It just says it does. Lovely. So, is that readable? Yeah. Let's roll with that. So, yeah. So as I said, we had the switch is wired kind of in a pretty ghetto way into the pin number 11 on the Arduino on the board, and the other side of the switch is wired into the ground. So every pin on a microcontroller like this can be used as an input or an output. You toggle it either way. And in this case, we're setting up the pin as an input, obviously. And we turn on what's called a pull-up resistor here on this line. That the purpose of that is to prevent the input from returning erratic results when it's not connected, which is a little more complicated piece of electrical background there. You can read up on the Arduino wiki about that. But we initialize the keyboard USB keyboard routine there with keyboard.begin. And then once that runs, the OS will recognize that USB device is connected and get ready to receive key presses from it. So the loop function is the second thing that Arduino requires you to to define. And what we do here, so this just runs continually after the setup function is called. What we do here is we do a read on the input pin, and we say if this is low, then that means that an electrical connection has been made between pin 11 and the ground. And the only way that can happen, of course, is if the switch is depressed. So if that happens, then we tell the keyboard library to press 97, which is the ASCII key code for A, of course. And if it's not, then of course we release it. So I'm just going to plug this in here and just make a comment here, and of course this is, you can't see this because I'm screen sharing, but let me stop screen sharing. And yeah, so just pushing that little key there basically allows the connection between the pin 11 and the ground to make contact, and that is read by the Arduino IDE as a low on pin 11, and that causes the key code to be sent. So that's your like simplest, most ridiculous keyboard firmware possible. Any questions about how that works or what's going on there?
There's one question.
Sorry. Well, one question. I know you've explained it, but it went over my head. The relationship between the Arduino Uno board that you showed and the little A-star chip. Explain that to me again?
Yeah, sure. So, let's see. The mute here. The Arduino Uno is this is the microcontroller. It's an Atmega 32P or something, and in order to, so it's got a USB port on it right there, but all the USB is handled by a separate chip, and it doesn't natively speak USB. So there's a newer Arduino board that's very similar to the Uno, like this, called a Leonardo, and that doesn't have the two chips. It doesn't have a separate USB chip and a main microcontroller. These two. That one has just a single chip called the Atmega 32U4, and that chip is the same chip as the one right there. I don't know if you, yeah, there you go. Right, so you can think of this as a clone of the Arduino Leonardo that's just shrunken down and turned into the smallest form factor possible. The Arduino Leonardo shares the form factor with the Arduino Uno because, I don't know if you can see, but there's all the pins of the Uno are along the top and the bottom there. They are, and so there's a bunch of peripherals you can buy that will sit on top of the Arduino. They're called shields. And so the Leonardo and the Uno share the same form factor for the purpose of the shields. But of course, if you have a big keyboard, maybe you could put something like this inside it. But for a travel keyboard, it doesn't make any sense. You want to get the smallest thing you can. So that's the relationship there. The Arduino is all the hardware design is Creative Commons licensed. So when you say it's a derivative or a clone, that's not a bad thing. That's exactly what it's designed to be, how it's designed to be used. So because they share the exact same chip, the exact same architecture, you can use the Arduino IDE to program both of them. Does that make sense? Yeah. Cool. Great. Yeah. So that's the firmware, like the simplest firmware you could imagine, right? It does one single key, and you could imagine. So let's pull that back up. We've got yeah. Can you get yeah, can you see that? It looks like, yeah, you can see that. Okay, cool. So yeah, you can see the click, 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 inserts that. So if you're looking at this, you could probably figure out how to, naively make it work for more than one key. You just digital read on 0 through 15 or whatever, and send the appropriate key codes based on whatever happens to be the state of the switches at the time, right? But it turns out that is not going to get you very far on a chip like this, because there's only 15 pins, right? So, this is a pretty minimalist keyboard, but 15 keys is too minimalist. So you have to actually scan through them a row at a time. So how that works is you, instead of connecting them all the switches to the ground, you connect them to one pin on either side, and all of the keys in the same column share an input pin, and all the keys in the same row share an output pin. And so you can say, I'm going to activate the first row, so I'm going to bring that output pin. I'm going to set that output pin, and I'm going to read all the inputs, and then I'm going to go on and activate the next row and read all the inputs. I'm going to activate the next row and read all the inputs. So that allows you to read much more key switches, even with a very limited number of pins. Now, of course, there's a cost to that. You can't simultaneously know all the state at the same time because you have to switch through it. But it turns out, it turns out you can cycle through them extremely quickly. That Mega 32U4 chip there is 16 megahertz. So for a computer, that's slow, but for a device that's just reading inputs and setting outputs, 16 million cycles a second means that you can scan through that much faster than the threshold of human perception, or much less motion of their fingers. So that's called matrix scan, and that's a big part of what makes a firmware code base. What makes up a firmware code base. And the other key feature that is part of that is setting layers. So as I mentioned, 42 keys, right? Not really enough for all the keys you want to press. So holding down the FN key then switches the layer to layer 1. And then holding down the FN and pressing escape will change the state into layer 2, where the function keys and the arrows are. And I'll just pull that up here so I can show you the design of the layers here. Yeah, so you can see, this is the first layer. You've got your QWERTY, ASDF, etc. The keys along the bottom are not where you are used to it, but you get used to that fairly quickly. Escape, Tab, Super is Command or the Windows key. Control and Alt in the middle. But then holding down the FN key here will bring you to this layer where you've got your digits. and you've got your page up, page down, a lot of the punctuation, and then finally FN plus this key will bring you to this layer where you've got your arrow keys, home and end, and your function keys and things like that. So with that, it allows you to make much better use of the limited number of key switches and type anything you would need to type. So yeah, any questions about that part?
I don't have a question, but I'll just state that I've actually modified your firmware keyboard layout so that the second layer, FN key, page up, page down, is now just up and down arrow because I didn't use page up and page down, but on OS X, like everything uses up and down arrow to cycle through. So you're like in Spotlight and you want to select things using the keyboard, you need the up and down arrow. So
Yeah.
And it was pretty simple, just modifying a JSON file and then flashing.
Cool. Yeah. So when you want to make a change to the layouts, you just end up doing a clone of the firmware project and editing a few files there. I can pull that up here and here it is. The layouts are just yeah. So here's like the QWERTY layout there. You can see probably. You've got QWERTY, and then you've got shifted like numbers, and then the bare numbers over here. But yeah, and then layer 2 is in a common file because it's shared among all the different layouts. But yeah, the code base here is it's so 174 lines of source that just implements the layering, the activating one row at a time. Excuse me. And then there's something called debouncing, where you have to allow the switches to kind of settle when you have an electrical contact made. Oftentimes, for just a few milliseconds, it'll cycle back and forth between on and off, and you need to wait for it to reach a consistent read before considering that switch fully pressed or released. So yes, but then of course you can add modifiers to the key codes as well to to allow you to type punctuation or combinations and things like that. And of course, since the controller is a Turing-complete computer, you could do much more than that. I haven't really explored that as much as I'd like to, but I mean, you could implement like a text adventure game in there. You could implement kind of an interactive back and forth shell of some kind. You could even connect some kind of hardware peripherals to the board in there. Like I've seen people hook up small LCD screens and things like that. So a temperature sensor, something like that. So yeah, there's a lot there. I've got a blog post about stepping through the process of writing a firmware, starting with a single key and going on from there. That you can see on atrius.technomancy.us/firmware if you're interested in following through with that. Hoping to continue that series in the coming weeks. Yeah. Go ahead.
And I believe you've got like an experimental branch of the firmware as well, using. Well, I know you have one using Forth, but I think you have one where you got it in a scheme of some sort.
Yeah, right. So I'm kind of a programming language nerd. So I wrote the first version of the firmware in just regular C, and that's what I use for my day-to-day stuff. I also implemented an interpreter for the Forth programming language, which is a very kind of low-level but still interactive programming language, and I couldn't make that fit on the Atmega chip because this thing, well, it's 16 megahertz and it has 32K of flash. It only has 2.5 kilobytes of memory, so of RAM. So that can lead to some challenges. I wasn't able to get my Forth implementation running on there, but I did get it running on this. This is actually has a completely different chip inside it. It's an ARM Cortex. So this one is like 48 megahertz and has 64 kilobytes of RAM. And so this is actually running a Forth interpreter. I ported over to here. But for the chips that are running on, or for the keyboards that do have the Atmega chip in them, I'm experimenting with something called MicroScheme. It's a compiler for a subset of the Scheme programming language, which allows for a little bit more of a functional approach to it. And I don't have that fully functional yet. Like there's no layering, and I haven't even gotten modifier keys working yet. But that's what my blog post is centered around. So having a lot of fun with that. That's it for what I had planned to talk about. So yeah, if there's other questions, happy to take that. Yeah.
Okay, well, there's no more questions from the audience here. I'll just hold the small few people that are viewing online.
Oh yeah, cool.
And give them about 20 seconds to hear that we're asking for questions.
Yeah.
While we wait, why don't you give us a brief tell-all about like what you're moving on to do?
Oh, sure, yeah. So, like Alex said, up till recently I was working with him at Heroku, and then from there, moving on with to take my family overseas to Thailand. We're going to be working with an organization on the border between Thailand and Burma. It's in a town with a lot of refugees and migrants fleeing from the civil war in Burma. So we're going to be working with poverty alleviation projects in and around that area, an orphanage, agricultural training for the farmers there with like organic techniques and things. So yeah, we're leaving about a week from now, and yeah, pretty excited about that. But I'm going to be continuing to sell the keyboard kits from over there. I've got some high school aged cousins who are going to be handling the packing of the orders and doing fulfillment from there. So hoping to continue that. And yeah, please do let me know if you have any further questions after this on Twitter or the Geek Hack forums I mentioned earlier. Also a great place to ask keyboard questions. I'm active on there So, yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. When I make some edits to the video, I'll post a follow-up with your Twitter account and some nice links to the firmware and the Atrus website and all that. So thanks again. I really appreciate you joining us today, Phil, especially since you're leaving the U.S. In about a week's time. So you've got a lot on your plate already.
Glad we could make it work.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
See ya.